Course of the event should write their question on index cards provided by the congressman's staff. And if the staff can raise their hand that are around the room, we have Vivian here, Isa back there. We have staff that will have badges on so you can identify us. You must print your first and last name on the card so we can read it. Please refrain from applause and or outbursts during the course of the discussion. And please refrain from side conversations. We want to make sure audience members can hear the answer to their questions so we can have a great conversation tonight. Please turn off your cell phones and set your ringer to vibrate. Please, no cell phone conversations in the room, and please step outside to take the call if you need it. And if you need assistance, please notify any one of our staff and we can help you. Without further delay, Congressman Alan Grayson.
Greetings, angry protesters. Thanks very much for having me here tonight. The subject tonight, and we'll be addressing different subjects later on in the Q&A, but the subject right now is what we do for working people here in America. And this is a cause of grave concern. I don't mean any sort of disrespect for retirees. I hope to be one day. And I also don't mean any sort of disrespect to the unemployed, which is a terrible tragedy that we need to do more to address. But the fact is that even if you're talking about people in this country who work, who have a job, who work 40 hours a week, sometimes 2 jobs, the fact is that many of those people are still living in poverty. Here in the United States, wages, hourly wages, adjusted for inflation, peaked in the 70s and have gone down since the 1970s here in America. And benefits have gone down as well. Here in America, we associate the middle class with several things. One thing is having a job. Another thing is having a home. Another thing is having some kind of savings for your retirement. Another thing is having a car. Well, what we're seeing is more and more people are dropping out of the middle class because they don't have the wages and the benefits they need to remain in the middle class. And we've struggled in our office with exactly what to do to address that problem. Unfortunately, it's not something that people talk about very much. It's not something that you hear about. It's not something you read in the newspaper. It's not something that you see on TV. But there's been a slow erosion of what it means to work in this country, and it's gone on for decades. I think that one of my main responsibilities as a congressman for Central Florida is to try to focus people's attention on this problem, this particular problem, and to see what progress we can make collectively as a nation. We're going to be doing a number of international comparisons tonight. You're going to see them up on the screen. They will shock you, and they will disappoint you. I'm an American. I'm proud to be an American. I want America to be number one. Not just number one in military spending, not just number one in the number of people we incarcerate, but number one in wages, number one in benefits, number one in a strong middle class. So that is the subject that we begin with tonight. Now, I've introduced a law that would increase the minimum wage from its current $7.25 an hour up to $10.50 an hour. That may seem like a substantial change to you, but in fact, all that does is it simply puts the level where it was in 1968, adjusted for inflation. Not adjusted for productivity. If it were adjusted for productivity, it would be $20 or $30 an hour, but simply adjusted for inflation. Also, I want to make sure that our tipped employees, and we have so many of them here locally working in restaurants, I want to make sure that our tipped employees get fair treatment. So we've introduced this bill called the Catching Up to 1968 Act of 2013. Since 1968, the minimum wage has lost nearly 1/3 of its value. If it had kept up with inflation, it would be close to the level that we're trying to put it at right now. Going forward, I want to see that adjustment made automatically. I want to see that we adjust for a cost of living increase, the minimum wage in the same way that we do for Social Security benefits, for many pensions, and so on. A tipped employee, believe it or not, receives only $2.13 an hour from the employer. and it's supposed to make up the rest of the gap, all the way up to $7.25 through tips. It's a hard thing to do, it's a hard way to live. Now, there are certain states around the country that already say that the minimum wage applies to tipped employees. So we're not talking about some radical concept. We're talking about simple equality regardless of the kind of work that you do. Tips are not compensation. Tips are a reward for doing good work, and they should be treated as such. No one is ever going to get rich off of tips. That shouldn't be what makes the difference between you're paying your rent each month and not paying your rent. Now, one of the remarkable things about this issue is that, in fact, the public feels so strongly about this. There's an overwhelming majority of people who think that it's time to give a raise to those who work. We don't like the idea that we have Americans working full-time, sometimes in 2 jobs, and still living in poverty. If you do work full-time in a wage job, that means you're making only $15,000 a year annually, assuming that you take no time off and you work 52 weeks a year full-time. That is 19% below the poverty line, 19% below what it takes to keep your house intact. And we struggle to make up for that. You know, we taxpayers have to pay for the low-income earners for their Medicaid coverage. We have to pay for the low-income earners' earned income tax credit. We have to pay for all sorts of benefits that the companies that employ them should be paying, and instead falls on the burden of the public to just make ends meet and to keep their lives intact. This week in Congress, we're voting on Section 8 housing. Section 8 housing is a program that is made available to the poor who have no other way to pay their rent. Well, many of those people work. Many of those people work full time, and yet the taxpayers end up picking up the tab for their housing bills. And in fact, there are 30 million workers in the United States who make between $7.25 and the amount that we would raise this minimum wage to if we raised it. 30 million Americans. We're not just talking about a handful. There is this misconception that we're talking about a bunch of college students or maybe high school dropouts. That's just not the case. We're talking about tens of millions of Americans, a very substantial part of our workforce. In fact, if we went up just a little bit higher, to $11, to $12, you'd be talking about half of the American workforce today. You know, one of those phrases that rattles around in the heads of many progressive legislators like me is something that I wouldn't even be able to attribute until we actually put together this presentation. I don't know how many times I have heard the phrase, people deserve a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. And that is exactly what we're talking about here. It turns out that that phrase was one that was made popular when it was coined by President Franklin Roosevelt. And here we are 80 years later, still fighting the same battle to try to do that. And since the minimum wage was raised last time, there have been such substantial increases in the cost of living. As you can see, since 1994 alone, the cost of food has gone up 10%. The cost of housing, if you own your own home, has gone up 80%. The cost of gasoline has gone up 60%. And yet, the cost of labor has gone up 0. That means that we are fundamentally underpaying people when we are overpaying for housing and gas and food and all the things that people need in order to survive. The average person on a minimum wage is 32 years old. That means that half of them are younger, half of them are older. Again, it's a complete misconception to think that the people who are working on a minimum wage are people who are simply entering the workforce right now. And who would benefit from raising the minimum wage? Well, obviously, the people who get the minimum wage would benefit because they'd be making more. But also the entire country would benefit. Since 2008, we've had one of the weakest recoveries from our recession on record. Why is that? Businesses will tell you, the honest businesses will tell you, it's not because of overregulation, it's not because of high taxes, it's because there aren't enough customers. There aren't enough customers. There needs to be more demand in this country, more people spending money. Well, one thing you can be sure of is that if you put money into the pockets of people making $7.25 an hour, they're going to spend it. And a higher minimum wage would boost those household earnings by 9 to 12%. Not only their earnings, though, but the earnings of the barber in the barber shop, the earnings of the waitress in the restaurant, the earnings of the landlord, whom they pay their rent each month. Everyone would be better off. The higher tide would lift all boats. Now, here's something that I personally find very disturbing. I want to see America number one. America is no longer number one when it comes to paying people for work. I know this chart is hard to read. It's the best one we could find. But if you look at it closely, you'll see that the minimum wage in Australia is more than twice as high as the minimum wage in the United States. It's $16 an hour. And you know something? The unemployment rate in Australia is much lower. Not just lower, but much lower than it is in the United States. They have coal, we have coal. They have natural gas, we have natural gas. Nobody can explain to me in any rational sense why Australians have twice as high a minimum wage as Americans do and a lower unemployment rate. And if you look down the line, you'll see Luxembourg, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Ireland, the United Kingdom, Japan, Canada, all these countries have higher minimum wages than the United States does. I find that unacceptable. I want America to be number one. Now, there is the false talking point from opponents of raising the minimum wage. And they say that if you raise the minimum wage, you will create unemployment. The evidence is actually to the contrary. You know, one of the interesting things about this country is that we have a federal system. Different states have different minimum wages. In fact, there was a campaign operated by someone here locally that was successful and raised the minimum wage for Florida alone several years ago. So not all states rely upon the minimum wage set by the federal government. Some have higher minimum wages. And what you see statistically is that in many places with a higher minimum wage, they have lower unemployment. And when places raise the minimum wage, often that you find that unemployment decreases, employment increases, and wages also increase. So for instance, we have the example of New Jersey. In 1992, the minimum wage was raised. The minimum wage was raised, and as a result, the number of jobs increased, not decreased. There is also this misconception that somehow, if we raise the minimum wage, then the economy will collapse, prices will skyrocket, we can't afford it, it's no good for us, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure that the Koch brothers, each one of whom has $17 billion in the bank, will still be able to make payroll, regardless. But be that as it may, it's important to understand that for all of these big companies, labor is only a tiny part of what their cost structure is. Only a tiny part. You have the example of McDonald's. McDonald's is a very profitable company. I'm sure they want to remain that way. But the fact is that if this law were adopted, their profits could remain exactly the same, and the cost of a Big Mac would increase by no more than 10 cents. Let's look at Walmart. We have two representatives, former representatives, from Walmart here tonight, and they'll be able to talk to you a little bit about that. In Walmart's case, Walmart makes billions of dollars of profit each year. And Walmart could literally give every employee from top to bottom, from the CEO all the way down to the most modest associate, a 30% raise. 30% raise, and Walmart would still be profitable. Because in the Walmart case, barely 10% of their actual costs are labor. And the same thing is true of many companies. So they impoverish their labor in order to boost their profits, when in fact labor is only a small part of what they have to pay, and only a small part of what cuts into those profits. Now, as I indicated before, one of the great benefits of raising the minimum wage is that you put more purchasing power in the hands of people who spend it. For better or for worse, this country for the past 40 years, more money has gone into the hands of the rich have gotten richer, and the poor have gotten poorer. That's been the way it's been since the 70s here in this country, since the mid-70s. Statistics prove that. One of the effects of that is that the rich don't necessarily spend all the money they make. So what happens to the economy? There's no demand in the economy. But when you put more money into the hands of the poor people, the people who need the money, then the money is sure to be spent. And as I indicated before, that means that less money will be flowing into speculation, less money will be floating into asset purchases, and more money will be going into demand in businesses and the real economy. So, the bottom line here is that our statute, the Catching Up with 1968 Act, will be an effective means of improving living standards and also raising up the entire economy through increasing demand for businesses, for labor, for every part of the economy. And in fact, many economists have indicated their support for this, as we'll soon be hearing. Now, in addition to that, since I was sent back to Washington, D.C. by the good people of Central Florida. Ooh, thank you. I told people that we won overwhelmingly last November because the Democrats wanted to see me back in Congress to do all the things that we do, and the Republicans just wanted to see me out of here. But and by the way, I come home every weekend, first flight back, last flight to DC. This is still my home. But in any case, we've been working very hard to do other things to benefit people who work. For instance, I'm disturbed to see what Walmart has done locally to make victims out of employees who are exercising their right to free speech. And therefore, we've introduced the Worker Anti-Retaliation Act, which simply means that you don't lose your First Amendment rights simply because you go to work for Walmart. In fact, you can keep saying on your own time what you want to say to your friends and not have to worry about losing your job. The Healthy Families Act is a bill introduced by others that I support. And the Healthy Family Act provides for paid sick leave, something that I became close to putting on the ballot here locally, but was defeated by huge multinational corporations who cared nothing about our health and interfered with our local political institutions to accomplish that, then went to the governor and had the governor sign a bill to prevent a fair vote on how we do our business here locally in Central Florida. I've also introduced, again, the Paid Vacation Act. The Paid Vacation Act is another act where you'll be surprised to see how out of sync the United States has become with international labor standards. We'll be seeing that shortly. It provides initially that there is 1 week of paid vacation for large employers, and later on after that, 2 weeks of paid vacation for large employers, 1 week of paid vacation for smaller employers. The Worker Anti-Retaliation Act that we submitted after seeing the local tragedy regarding Walmart is an act that protects employees from retaliation in the workplace based on actions taken to protest or try to improve working conditions. This is not a bill that's directed toward union employees, it's a bill that's directed toward non-union employees. For union employees, the union's there. It can do what it needs to do to protect the rights of its employees. The non-union employees, they're the ones with no protection under current law that seems to be affected. The Republicans in Washington have, in effect, shut down the National Labor Relations Board. They passed a bill through the House a few weeks ago to defund it, to eliminate all the funding that is used to protect worker rights in this country. So I believe that we need a new statute that will allow workers to take their own fate into their own hands and gives them a private right of action. They can go to court and sue those employees who take away their First Amendment rights when they're trying to organize. I also support the Healthy Families Act, and this allows workers up to 7 paid sick leave days per year when recovering from a short-term illness or the illness of someone whom they love, who they have to take care of. And it prohibits the employer from interfering with the employee's rights in that regard. Some of you are familiar with what happened here locally. We had, what, 70,000, is that correct? 70,000 Orange County residents signed a petition saying that they supported paid sick leave. The county commission went through legal maneuvers to squelch that and keep it off the ballot. And then Governor Scott stepped in and said that statewide, no such local option would ever be contemplated or allowed. And that's where we are right now. So we need a federal law that protects our rights to make our self-determination. Now, here's what I was referring to. This is paid sick leave days in 22 countries. In Luxembourg, you have 5 days off if you have the flu. You have 50 days off if you have cancer and you need that time off. Same thing in Norway, same thing in Finland, and so on. All the way down there at the bottom, unfortunately for us, at the very bottom is the United States. Below Luxembourg, Norway, Finland, Austria, Germany, Belgium, Sweden, Denmark, Netherlands, Spain, Italy, Greece, Japan, France, Canada, Iceland, Ireland, Switzerland, Australia, the UK, New Zealand. All the way down there at the very bottom is the paid sick leave that American workers get. I don't want to see America at the bottom. I want to see America number one. I want to see America at the top. The Paid Vacation Act is a bill that I introduced when I was in Congress before. It guarantees 1 week's paid vacation initially to any employee who works for an employer with 100 or more employees. It also covers part-time employees, because what we're seeing more and more is that employers, including some local employers, are gaming the system. They're changing full-time jobs into part-time jobs in order to avoid paying benefits, including avoid paying health coverage, which is going to be mandatory shortly. For those employers, we say that's not acceptable. We're going to make our laws extend to you. You're not going to be able to evade your responsibilities any longer simply by cutting people's hours. And then 3 years after the bill is implemented, at that point, employers with more than 100 employees would then have to provide 2 weeks of paid vacation, and with 50 or fewer employees, 1 week of paid vacation. As you can see, that won't exactly put us at the top. We are now dead last among 21 industrial countries when it comes to paid vacation. Virtually every country in the entire world, almost every country in the entire world, mandates paid vacations for all workers. There's only a handful. I'm talking about countries like Zimbabwe. They're the only countries that don't have a law for paid vacations. Typically, as you can see, among developed countries like ours, the norm is 4 weeks of paid vacation. France, 30 days of paid vacation. The UK, 28. Norway, 25 plus 2 days holidays. Denmark, 25. Finland, 25. Sweden, 25. And you have to go all the way down to the bottom again to find the United States of America at 0. 0. Now, you tell me, how is it that the Germans can have 24 days of paid vacations plus 10 days of paid holidays each year, and they have a vibrant economy, an economy with mass amounts of exports, with a capital surplus, with a trade surplus, with a budget surplus? Are they somehow better than us? I don't think so. I don't think that's true at all. I think that our workers are every bit as good as their workers, and we deserve the same reward as they do. Now, why do we need this? Because it's not happening for so many American workers according to their own benefits. And I get this question from time to time, mostly from TV reporters, by the way. They say, gee, doesn't everybody get a paid vacation? The answer is no. No. Just because they get a paid vacation doesn't mean everybody gets a paid vacation. Imagine trying to explain this to a member of Congress when we're not in session from, what is it, August 3rd to September 9th this year. We're not in session from August 3rd to September 9th. I have to convey to them that not everyone has that kind of privileged existence. And in fact, 1 out of 4 Americans have to work every day until they die or retire, whichever comes first. 1 out of 4 Americans. And the costs are enormous. We have a staggering loss in health. We have a staggering loss in productivity. We have far more people who get sick and need the time off, unfortunately, because they're sick, because they never get a day off. And what you see is that when people do get a day off, study after study has shown their productivity rises enormously and stays high for months afterwards. So who are we really hurting? And we say to 1 out of 4 American workers, you can't ever have a day off. We're hurting ourselves. Well, so these are some of our priorities. This is what I've been working on very hard in Washington. I am happy to tell you that last week, Salon magazine, a neutral objective observer, said that I am the most effective member of Congress. And in fact, objectively speaking, in the past 7 months, we've passed more amendments on the floor of the House than any member of Congress, Democrat or Republican. And perhaps one day you will read that in the Orlando Sentinel. But I doubt it. I doubt it. So in any case, thank you all very much for being here. We're going to go to question and answer shortly, but in the meantime, we have a special gift for you all. We have a national economist who we brought in just for the sake of this meeting, who's going to tell us more about the economic case for raising the minimum wage, because as we all know, it's time for a raise. Thank you very much.